I drove 3 hours, paid for a hotel, and bought all new market supplies. And after making just $32 on day 1, I didn't go back for day 2 of the market. Here's exactly what happened. Why try a market? I've been running my business on and off for about 9 years now, and I've always wanted to do a market, but I've just honestly never really got around to doing it. And also the thought of buying all of the supplies and everything I need to do the market, at times I just couldn't really justify the cost of doing that. But every year around Christmas, I would see loads of small businesses doing markets, and I was like, you know what, I really need to do this. I feel like 2025, last year, is going to be the year that I make it happen. I just think a market is a really cool way of bringing your brand into real life and actually getting to talk to people that in person that are interested in your products. Even though I'm super introverted and I don't really like talking to people, I feel it's always good to push yourself out of your comfort zone, and this is what I was doing with this market. The market prep. To be honest, I spent a good 2 months prepping and researching exactly how I wanted my market display to look, doing research of what other small businesses similar to me had already done. As I'm a super organised person, before I even bought any of the things that I wanted to buy for my market table, I took all of the measurements off Amazon, put them into Adobe Illustrator, measured out the exact dimensions of my table and all the individual items, and then digitally viewed how everything would fit together and made sure that it would actually all fit on the table. This was super helpful to do before buying anything, because surprisingly, when I put everything in, quite a few of the display stands didn't actually fit on the table, so I had to jig everything around, and it's a good way of not having to send a load of things back if you've made a mistake. So make the mistakes now, which are free, and then you don't have to worry about sending a load of stuff back. Once everything was measured and I was 100% sure everything fit, I bought, I would say, 90% of my stuff on Amazon. I literally put it all into my basket and bought it all at once, and over the next few days everything started coming. Some things can take a few weeks though on Amazon, so make sure when you're checking out you just look at that ahead of time, because if your market's really soon, you need to know that it's actually going to be here in time for the market. A great tip, if you are doing a Christmas market, if you buy everything, if you have time, around Black Friday, I got a lot of things on discount and it was a lot cheaper than buying it, a few weeks before. Only do this if you've got enough time for the market. Mine was towards the end of December, so I had plenty of time to be organised for that. A few things I couldn't get on Amazon, so a branded printed banner which I got from Vistaprint, and also I think they sold wooden crates on Amazon, but they were really expensive, so I decided to order them from Michael's in the end. Okay, this is the juicy part. This is all the money I invested in this market. This is where I'm going to shock a lot of people. I invested way too heavily in this market, considering it was my very first market. I know I should have started smaller, and looking back, I wish I did. I had this vision and I really wanted it to be perfect because it was my first one, but learn from my mistakes and start small and work your way up. Okay, first off, fuel. The market was 3 hours away from where I live, so 3 hours back, so 6 in total, and this came to $46.38. Because this was an overnight market, we had to stay in a hotel for 2 nights, which was $126.87. This was actually meant to be a lot more expensive, but I also got this in the Black Friday sale. Next is the market fee for 2 days, and this was $158.40. £3.45, which for my first ever market was a considerable amount of money. So I would recommend for your first ever market, go for a fairly cheap one just to learn as you're going and do not make my mistake. Next were the market stall display items. This came to £484.53. This was by far my biggest expense. I wish I didn't spend that much, but we live and we learn. Next is branding materials, and this came to £189.85, and packaging was £63.11. Next is food, which came to £95.75. For 2 days, for 2 people, I feel like this is fairly low, but we did bring cereal, we bought some sandwiches and everything because I wanted this market to actually be profitable. Caveat, it wasn't. So I thought it was a good idea to bring as much food as we could from home. And lastly, other items like a card reader came to £40.25. So before selling anything at all, I was already down £1,205.19.
Oh my God, bro.
Looking back at this number, it's still, I'm just like, why did I spend that much? It was my first market. I just wanted it to be perfect, and I just basically got whatever I want within reason. But yeah, just don't do it. The day of the market. The market started around 10 a.m, but we were allowed in an hour and a half before, so at 8:30 to start setting up the market stall. Before the market started, they had a bit of a line of people waiting to come in, which was really exciting. But shortly after, this died down and then the traffic started to pick up around lunchtime. Because the market was inside a mall, there was quite an eclectic mix of loads of different people, ages, demographics, maybe not necessarily the people that would kind of go for my products. The issue I found very early on in this market is that my products specifically, a lot of my things are bookish related things. So like a book sleeve, a Kindle case, all reading related things. And say my target audience was there, but they weren't necessarily into books or reading, I'm automatically cut off from them and maybe alienating myself from them and maybe being a bit too niche for a market. I had a lot of people browsing and a few people stopped by and took my business cards, but people just weren't buying. I had really high hopes for the start of the market because I think it was within the first hour or 40 minutes or something, I had a sale. I was like, whoa, okay, like it's not too busy and I've already had a sale. So I was like, I thought I had a bit of a taste of what was to come for the next hours of the market, but I was very wrong. In the market in total, I think there are about 30 stalls. We were all selling pretty different things and no one else was selling any bookish things. So I thought this was a great opportunity because I'm the only stall here specifically selling bookish type things. As I said earlier, I'm quite an introverted person, so the fact that I was doing an in-person market was quite a big step for me and definitely pushing myself out of my comfort zone. When people were browsing, I didn't really want to bother them too much, but if they did make eye contact or anything, I might just say hello or smile or something. But if someone wants to actually grab your attention, they will fully look at you and say, oh, hello, you know. I noticed some people are like, oh no, you should make the effort and everything, but I know if I was browsing, I wouldn't really want to be disturbed. I would just want to peacefully look at what's to offer, and if I wanted something, I would say something. If I didn't, I would just carry on and go. In total, from the moment I got up in the morning until when we got back to the hotel in the evening, I think it was about 14 hours in total. So it was a very, very long day. The reason this market was open for so long is because it's in a mall. So they have to keep in line with the opening hours of all the shops inside the mall. So normally most markets I would say are, you know, a few hours, but this one was very long and it was a hell of a lot of work just to get 2 sales the entire day. The decision. Halfway through the day, I was like, I've made such a big mistake. I don't know if I can spend an entire whole day standing here prepping, packing, and everything just to get a few sales. Don't get me wrong, after spending 1.2k on this market, I didn't really expect to make a profit. You know, if I could have broken even, I would have been really happy with that. But honestly, if I had just even made £600 back of the 1.2k, I would have been more than happy with that. Throughout the day, I was just going through all the emotions. I was like, I've put weeks and weeks of planning and money and prep into this. And when it just doesn't go well, honestly, it just cuts so deep. After the market had ended, I discussed with my fiance potentially not going back the next day because honestly, I just couldn't bear doing another full day with not really much return. So I messaged the organizer and just said, is it okay if I don't do the next day? And they were totally fine with that. The next day I was feeling a lot better in myself, and upon reflection, I think I definitely made the right decision not doing the second day in the market. Was it actually a failure? At first, I did consider the market to be a massive failure, but upon reflecting, I think my products in general just need a little bit more explaining as to what they are. Whereas when you have social media, through your content, you can kind of explain your reasoning behind something and why you have designed it this way. With an in-person market, it's kind of hard to do this. Like, you could have some signage explaining why this is the way it is and some bullet points and everything. And if you strike up a conversation with someone, you can explain then. But honestly, throughout the day, because people weren't really talking to me or they weren't really interested in my things, I didn't really get the opportunity to explain anything about my products. I think the location and branding of the market itself was great and 100% my target audience. But because it was in an open mall, you can get a massive mix of people, and I think for a next market, I should maybe go for one that's a bit more specific to the type of products that I sell. I think the market organisers themselves did a really great job of promoting it and getting people in. Just unfortunately, the people on the day just weren't really for me and my brand. But I would say it's better to try than to wonder what could have been. I did adjust my pricing slightly for this market because I didn't want that to be a barrier for people buying. But in the end, it turned out that that didn't really matter anyway. What I learned so you don't make the same mistake. For your first market, I would say stay local, as this was the first mistake that I made. I drove 3 hours to the market, had a 2-night stay. This had already hiked up the cost of going to the market before I had even sold anything. Sometimes it's hard to know what type of people are going to turn up to the market. Even if the Instagram account for the market that you're going to looks like your target audience, you never know on the day if those types of people are going to turn up. But I would recommend trying to do a lot of research and digging before committing to a market. On the day of the market, I talked to 2 store holders. One was making crochet items and the other one was selling candles. Both of their products, literally anyone could buy, so anyone can use a candle, anyone can have a cute crochet item, whereas my items, if you're not into reading, it won't really apply to you, and I think that is where I had the issue. So for your market, if you have products that could be gifted to anyone, I would say that is definitely more beneficial than things that are too niche. This is the biggest one for me. Don't overinvest in your very first market. Get the bare minimum for it to look good and presentable, and as time goes on, just slowly and slowly improve it and make it better. Before you have bought a single thing for your market, make sure you know your numbers. So this is absolutely all the costs. So the market, traveling costs, fuel, food, the stock, absolutely everything. Once you know the grand total, work out how much you need to make in order to make a profit. If you go into the market and you think, whoa, I've made £600, this is so great, but then realizing it cost you £700 with all of the supplies and travel, it can give you a false sense of security. Moving forward, I quit the second day of the market, and I just think this was the right decision for me. Not everything you try is going to work, but I'd rather try, learn, and adjust rather than wondering what would have happened. If you're thinking about doing your first market, I really hope this helped and opened your eyes to all of the things that can go wrong and how costly it can actually be. I will keep you updated if I ever decide to do another market, but if I do, it's definitely going to be one closer to home.